The Lord's Supper. What does it mean to us today? Is it just a routine that we have developed into tradition? Or is it something that we are commanded to do? Is it simply another part of our service? Or is it more? So let's begin with a little bit of context. Let's begin with his death. A crucifixion was reserved for the worst offenders of Hebrew law. But Jesus wasn't just simply crucified. He was scourged first. A scourging involved ripping the shirt off of the person, getting a heavy whip with bits of rock or bone attached at the ends, and those bits were meant to tear the skin. It was customary to give 39 lashes, as oftentimes 40 would be enough to kill somebody. Afterwards, Jesus' crucifixion began. Before the execution actually begins, the person had to make the journey to the execution site while holding a cross, which weighed about 110 pounds. Once the journey is completed, the person's hands were nailed to the sides of the cross, and his feet are pressed together and nailed to the lower portion of the cross. This causes your knees to bend slightly and twisted your body. There was a small beam on the cross that you could sit on, but it caused more pain as you would have to contort your body to sit there. While you're making these movements to the beam and off the beam, the nails are digging deeper and deeper into their skin, causing more and more pain as they sat down to rest for a moment and then lifted up their bodies to breathe. This sequence of events lasts the entire ordeal. The form of crucifixion they would attempt on Jesus is known as a crucifracture, where in order to speed up the process, your legs are broken, preventing you from getting air and resting as easily. We know that the fracture part didn't take place, as the body of Jesus was dead before the event was needed. The thieves weren't reported to be so lucky. They would attempt a crucifracture because a Sabbath day was approaching. Crucifixions are also psychological, as it was saved for only the worst of the worst. Especially in Jesus' case, who was without sin, he became sin for us. He took on all of the sins of the world, and then he was sacrificed. During the crucifixion process, lots were taken for Jesus' belongings. People gave him a scepter and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," while slapping his face, and other people bowed their knee to him sarcastically. And yes, Jesus did have those two thieves next to him as well. Imagine how that must have looked. Now that we have that out of the way, let's step back a bit to the Mount of Olives. Before the crucifixion began, Jesus knew that two of his own would betray him. One betrays him 3 times. Another betrays him to the point where he is captured. That must have weighed heavily on his heart, as he spent a good deal of his ministry with these men. The emotion and sorrow in his prayers to God in the garden must have been overwhelming. Judas then comes with the multitude and attempts to capture Jesus. Peter draws a sword and cuts the ear off one of the servants of the high priest. Yes, Jesus could have prevented this, but knowing that his time has come, this needed to be done. He gave himself to his oppressors. The amount of love Jesus has for us is very clear. He could have called 12 legions of angels and escaped, but he willingly heeded, so that he could become the ultimate sin sacrifice. His own apostles fled him. Save for God, he was essentially all alone. When Jesus was led off to Caiaphas, Peter followed afar off, and while watching the proceedings, he did betray Jesus. And worse than that, according to Luke's account, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. All this had to weigh on Jesus' mind while he was being tried. that Judas denied him, gave him to the mob, his own disciples left him, and Peter, following from a distance, was about to betray him. With all this in mind, I'd like to now speak of the Lord's Supper. Before they arrived in the upper room, Jesus tells his apostles to find a donkey tied with a colt and to bring them to him. He rode into Jerusalem on a donkey sitting on the coats of his apostles, while the crowd laid their coats on the road as he passed. So everything up to this point has shown Jesus' humility. He willingly gave himself up to the mob. He was sacrificed beside two thieves. This sets the theme for the Lord's Supper, and these are things that we should consider while we partake. Jesus' life was one of servitude, and his death on the cross, his physical death, was the ultimate sacrifice necessary to give us the chance of forgiveness of sins.